joining us. I'm Chris Thurber. I am the founder of prepforschool.com and prepforcamp.com, which ease the transition for young people into exciting new developmental experiences, boarding schools and summer camps. I'm a psychologist by training, and I live here in New Hampshire with my wife and two boys, and delighted that Sarah Kurtz McKinnon is here to co-present this webinar. Sarah, give people your quick bio, and then let's start with our first point.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for having me. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I am an overnight camp director turned MBA and camp consultant and trainer. I work with camps and organizations to help them bring positive practices into their work environments, because I think it makes for better business, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. It makes sense for people to love what they do and feel respected there. So that's what I studied in business school, and that's what I'm trying to be out in the world doing from my basement. And as mentioned before, I have an 18-month-old daughter named Shiloh, and I live with her and my husband and our two dogs here in Ann Arbor. So, and it is nap time. So this is a great time of day to talk about some business stuff, some leadership stuff. So, yeah. So Chris, do you have a paper slide for us? Was that one of our other?
Well, we were going to go with paper slide, but now that we are just completely on Zoom, this is pretty slick. So let me begin with our first point here. And that is, again, unlikely strategy number one: communicate less. Wow. Well, Sarah, you and I did a pretty good job of communicating less at the beginning of this webinar, but say a couple things about communicating less. If you are in a leadership position in this COVID-19 crisis, so principal, head of school, dean of students, dean of faculty, owner, director of a summer youth program, why communicate less?
Well, I mean, every morning you open your email inbox and every company that you bought like a dog toy from for the past 7 years wants to send you their update of how they're treating, COVID-19, right? There's an information overload. The folks at GoCamp Pro have been processing lots of information. They have a Slack channel, they're compiling stuff, but they came up with a great idea last week, which was just, we're going to send a Monday digest of the best, like what you need to know. And that makes so much more sense, right? It's cutting out the noise and being a filter for your audience, as being an expert filter, instead of kind of sending them everything. We want communication, we want openness and honesty, but we don't want a lot of static. And I think when we're nervous, when we're thinking, people are thinking about us, we're sending it out, but we also have to remember they're thinking about like 100 other things. So how do we make sure when we do reach out to them, it is heard? And so that's kind of a challenge with our constituencies.
You and I are both really fond of Brene Brown's quote, "Clear is kind."
Right.
And the principle of communicating less has baked into it clarity, prioritization, and ensuring that you, as a leader, as a supervisor, as a CEO, as someone who is guiding a team, is making the sorts of decisions that you were just talking about, Sarah, is digesting what does need to be shared. And we're very much now past this period of just, email diarrhea and just sharing as much as we possibly can in the hopes that people will consider this helpful. I think at the beginning it was helpful, and we weren't sure exactly of the duration or parameters of the crisis, of quarantine, of anything. And as it evolved, that became clear. And now a key task for anyone leading a team is to communicate selectively and show your leadership by making those choices. You might have to review a lot of content while keeping yourself sane, but please don't bury your team in endless emails and texts and articles and things. Distill it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and also that goes for meetings too. We've had a lot of people say, "Oh, we have Zoom fatigue," or my friends from childhood like to Zoom on Wednesday night at like 8:30. And last night a text came out. It was like, "I've been on Zoom all day. I just can't. Like, can we skip till next week?" And we're tempted to schedule meetings to check in with folks because they're not in the office, and that is important. But if you're going to schedule a meeting, I encourage you to think, can I formulate an agenda for this meeting, and do I have objectives for this meeting, and to plan those out, to send them out in advance. And if I can't think of those things, just cancel it. Like, you don't have to feel compelled to meet, but there should be a point to every meeting that you have and an agenda for it. So people aren't just like feeling complete Zoom zombies, right? Like, that is not good either. So we want people to know when they show up, their time will be respected and they'll have accomplished something.
Yeah, I think that's great. And let's remember too, working from home is what most of us are doing, with the added twist of, if you have kids, they're also home. So it's not quite as perhaps efficient, or you're not as able to focus and concentrate as easily as before. All right.
Right.
Number 2, give more challenges. Now, this seems especially unlikely given what we just said. So communicate less, but what do we mean by give more challenges?
This is like the total clickbait webinar. I'm like loving these titles that you're putting up. But most people, I can't think of very many people, unless they're essential workers, and even essential workers aren't doing exactly what they used to do, right? And so kind of thinking about who our team members are and tapping into those skill sets or interests that could help the team is a really strengths-based approach to managing a team in crisis. So what we mean by that is not just saying, okay, like, your job was registrar at the school and now you're doing all the same things. It's having that talk with them and understanding from that perspective, well, actually, this person is also really great at building a website, or this person is really passionate about helping students from low income households, or whatever it is, to gain that knowledge. And then what we would call in kind of this positive business research is a practice called job crafting, to think about how do we match the skills, interests, passions with the times, and create a temporary or adjusted job description. So with the person's few precious hours, they can really be thriving in the work that they do. And so that's the challenges part, right? It's matching them with things that you might need, even if that is on the outskirts of what is normally, part of the work.
Yeah, I mean, if people in leadership positions can recognize that a key task this week is, if they haven't already, asking everyone on their team, what is it that used to be part of your job that really isn't necessary right now in these circumstances, that you can just let go? What is it that you think you might be able to add to the team's efforts to reach some of these goals that is an untapped or unknown skill? Wasn't part of your prior job description, but you mentioned, oh, somebody might be really good at building out a website, or somebody might be really good at running numbers when their previous job didn't have a quantitative part to it. You've got to ask, or you wouldn't know. And Sarah and I will talk about character strengths in a moment, but when we're talking about skill sets, I promise that everyone in a supervisory position does understand their team members well, but also is going to be very surprised when they ask that question, what actually people, as you said, are passionate about. And of course, you're going to get far better performance and job satisfaction and engagement with your team if you're allowing them to shine. Yes, this is a crisis, but it's an enduring and sort of chronic crisis. And we are through this initial phase of being a bit disoriented and everybody searching for what is it that they're going to be doing, or trying to establish a new routine in their, house, apartment, wherever it is that they live. We can now, as leaders of teams, trust that we've given everyone plenty of time to settle, and it is time to give new challenges, but not a challenge for challenge's sake. Actually crafting, as you said, revised jobs or new jobs that are customized to people's skills.
Well,
All
people
right,
people
go
want to
ahead.
help, right? People want to help, and so being able to job craft just makes your work more meaningful, right? And I think since a lot of people in our industries in education and youth development are naturally inclined to want to get out there and roll up their sleeves and help in a crisis situation, are kind of tied down because they can't, from a health standpoint, from a childcare standpoint, what have you. So giving them an opportunity to say at the end of the day, I made a contribution, is also really good for their mental health and their, as you said, engagement with the job. I'll put a link into the chat if you're interested in learning more about job crafting. It's really good to learn about in a time of crisis, and also just in general, I think can improve organizations.
Thank you for doing that. And while you're doing that, I'll move to the next slide here. And that is return to your roots, and then subtext, before you branch out. So Sarah and I want to talk a little bit about what it means to return to your roots before you branch out. What I think is really important here is asking people what they would like to do to contribute. As you said, people are wanting to help. And we just talked about how important it is to find out what skills they have that might contribute to the team's goals, but were not part of their previous job description, and being open as a supervisor to recrafting what their job is. But here, I think people really need to think about why they were hired in the first place. And I think that supervisors need to ask that question of all of their team members. Do you remember what you were most interested in when you applied for this job? Or why is it, do you think, you were offered this job? What did you pitch initially? And you as a supervisor saying, I initially hired you because of this. And going back to those fundamental questions will reveal what are some of the person's character strengths. You can also go to any number of positive psychology websites like AuthenticHappiness.org and do a self-assessment of character strengths. But different from skill sets, if a skill is being able to play the violin or name any of the birds that are commonly found at feeders in New England, that those are wonderful skills. And they can bring joy or be helpful as teaching tools. But we're really talking here in this third unlikely strategy about character strengths. So that could be generosity or appreciation of beauty or collaboration, leadership, teamwork, all of those things that are enduring aspects of just how you operate. And asking the question, why were you hired? Or telling the person, one of the reasons I hired you or I asked you to be on this team is this. And now we're hitting things from a different angle. Not can you build a website, but character type strengths. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Sarah. And I'll also hold up for people a list of character strengths in just a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of like a hidden superpower thing, right? Like we often notice these things or kind of make a mental note when we see someone exhibiting a character strength, but rarely do we say it out loud to ourselves or to others about ourselves or to others about themselves. And so I think the whole coronavirus situation is kind of making us kind of go back to the basics in a certain way, whether it's like, we made bread the other night. I didn't make bread. My husband made bread. When we just like, normally just go buy a loaf at the store. But it was like, he's good at it. And it was fulfilling and filling and fun to kind of do it. So to be able to kind of see what's underneath all the clutter in our lives or in our normal workplaces and kind of go back to the beginning, or what normal conveniences take care of. It gives folks something to be grounded on. I think that is really powerful. I put a link in the chat about, it's from VIA, and they have a practice called strength spotting, and the link kind of describes how to do it.
That's
great.
excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm putting up here in the screen share character strengths for anyone that wants a little bit more concrete distinction between a skill and a character strength. So as you can see, things like curiosity, bravery, kindness, citizenship, these are not things that are particular skills like baking bread, but if you take a character strength like citizenship and combine it with a skill, like Sarah was saying, she and her husband baked bread, or it sounded like actually Robert baked bread, and you and Shiloh
I
ate
didn't
it.
do it.
I mean, let's just be clear. Okay.
Oh yeah, we contributed.
So,
yeah.
Okay, all right. Moral support, right? But look, you can bake, 2 loaves of bread, or if you bake a loaf of bread, cut it in half. Bring the other half, to your neighbor's house. Wrap it up, put it on the doorstep, ring the doorbell, or text them ahead of time that you're coming. That is a kind of, citizenship in action. So that would be an example of tapping into a character strength, like citizenship in so far as looking out for the neighborhood or other people in the neighborhood. There are lots and lots of ways that you can use those character strengths. And what Sarah and I are saying is it's essential that you as a leader help people get back in touch with what their character strengths are. It has a tremendously positive effect on their mental health, and it also provides direction for the recrafting of their role and responsibilities. The research is very clear. If people don't have an opportunity on a regular basis to tap into their character strengths, then they will be more anxious, less happy, and much more likely to burn out and leave their current job. So if you haven't identified those character strengths and retooled a person's job description or set of responsibilities that allows for the expression or tapping into those character strengths, this is the time to do it.
Well, and also as a leader, in times of crisis, people are weird, right? People are already weird, and you don't know what's going on in someone else's life, if they're short with you or they send you an angry email. And there was this great article in Harvard Business Review about, it was like called "The Feeling That You're Feeling Is Actually Grief." And it was talking about when you have one of these negative interactions with someone, to not think about who is this person in this moment, but who is this person typically? And that helps you have compassion when there's an exchange that is maybe more negative than you would typically see, to recognize that everyone's kind of in this pressure cooker, and to know that, okay, that's not like who they are. It's just what was happening in that moment. So identifying character strengths for the people that you work with can help you not feel like a negative prejudice toward them, if they, not prejudice, a negative assumption about them if they do something.
Sure.
Yeah, Abigail just put it in. She beat me to it. Thank you so much. That's the
Abigail, you rock. That's wonderful. All right, so our fourth unlikely strategy is show your weaknesses. And again, there is an irony here, or it might seem paradoxical that we're suggesting people in supervisory supervisory positions show their weaknesses. But part of what we mean here by showing your weaknesses is to be honest about your experience, your opinions, forecasts, what the risks are. Again, we are through a kind of acute phase of this crisis, and what your team wants from you now is the straight scoop. Uh, you don't necessarily have to give them a window into every single decision that you're making or every single modality that you're using to make an important decision. But yes, they want to be updated. More than the facts, though, they want the process of dealing with this crisis to be humanized. And I don't think that you're doing your team any good if you're hiding the truth from them just to prevent disappointment. They really want to know personally what some of your struggles are that, again, that are appropriate for you to share, but to know that there is some camaraderie, or they're going to, I think, feel a great deal of loyalty to you if they can see that you're human and going through some of the same things they are. And as an organization, whether it's a company or a camp or a school, to really know what some of the difficult facts are about the state of affairs. What else, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, people can smell BS, right? Or they'll find out eventually, and they'll feel betrayed. So to be able to kind of write the headline yourself in an honest way makes a lot of sense, right? Also, I think if we're working with a younger set of staff, like they're used to having a lot of immediate knowledge about everything. And so putting stuff out there right away increases your credibility. Obviously, you don't want to say something prematurely. If you're thinking, oh, am I going to cancel my upcoming event or program, and you don't know the answer to that yet, say, I don't know the answer to that yet.
Right.
Here's what we're waiting for. Camps that say, or programs that say, yes, we're doing everything possible to make this happen. Okay, that's true. And they canceled the Olympics, or they rescheduled the Olympics. So, people can sniff that, like, it's not a sure thing if that's what you're saying. So to be able to put some understanding out there that you're not invincible is actually a relief. I was talking to my friend, a camp director, yesterday. She said, I went from being desperate that camp was going to run this summer to really relieved that it's probably not. And I think she said that in a way that she was confiding in me, but I think that would be an amazing thing to share with her team or even her parents, because she loves her program more than anyone. But she's relieved that it's not going to run, really shows the extent of the dangers that would occur at her individual program if they were to proceed as normal. And that type of explanation is something that people will understand and buy into, versus one that is more cookie cutter. So I think the emotional appeal is another part of vulnerability, to be able to show your feelings. Also is an element of persuasion that can help stakeholders, get on board with a tough decision that you might be making.
And when it comes to tough decisions and the then consequences of what that means for the organization, and how then with maybe a revised set of goals, you're actually going to, as a leader, try to move the group from point A to point B. You and I are both pretty big fans of a technique a lot of people know called appreciative inquiry. And if you're unfamiliar with this technique, people like David Cooper-Ryder have written excellent books that are clear and brief on the strategy. But essentially, you will always notice, as someone in a supervisory position, someone who directs a team, who is responsible for the outcome, what's not going well. Human beings are really good at not only sniffing out BS, as you said, Sarah, but also noticing things that don't meet their expectations. So if you say you're going to start, as we've all been doing in the last month, a Zoom meeting at 3:00 and it's 3:05 and half the people have not yet joined, that can be irksome, right? Now, you pointed out something that all supervisors need to keep in mind, which is right now, what are all the simultaneous demands on people's time, especially when they're at home with their families? What else are they responsible for, and how do they act usually? What appreciative inquiry does, it says, all right, let's take the circumstance of people being late to a meeting. Rather than berating them or railing on them, hey, listen, you're wasting everybody's time by showing up 5-10 minutes late. I expect you to be on time, and just kind of dropping the hammer without regard to what their circumstances were. Recognize that the other half of the team was able to make it there on time. And appreciative inquiry has a central question, which is, if something went well, even if it was only partially, that gives you extraordinarily valuable information. So rather than saying to the people who are late, what the hell happened? Don't let it happen again. You want to say to the whole group, I know that it's an extraordinarily demanding time. And I noticed that roughly half of you, despite all of the demands on your time, were able to show up here right at 3. Can you share with the rest of the group how you made that happen? So again, appreciative inquiry is saying, the appreciative part is, I appreciate the fact that some of this is going well. And the inquiry is, how do we get more of the good stuff? This keeps people in a positive, creative, contributory frame of mind. If I ball out the half of the people who were late, then the people who are on time are thinking, wow, this is an even longer waste of my time. And the people who are late are thinking, my supervisor, my director, my boss has no idea what I just had to deal with upstairs. My senile mother-in-law who just stepped in the puppy's poop that, now somebody has to clean up, but it's being tracked around the house unless I, clean it up right now. I mean, I don't know. I can't make this stuff up, right? But just pulled that one right out of the air. You get a very different response from your group if you can identify what's going well and ask them to get creative about how you can get even more of that.
Right. And people know that not everything is all good all the time. So to be able to identify things that are going well and then slow down and have that serious moment when you say, we're $50,000 short and we can't, continue the business unless we raise this money, is important to do too. So figure out, is there a reason to keep any sort of secret about the operations or the behind the scenes stuff in your org? Sometimes there is confidentiality reasons or whatever, but most of the time there really isn't. And if people understand the depth of a problem that an organization they care about is facing, and they have access to that data, I think they're more likely than not to mobilize and try to make a difference versus, finding out when it's too late that this was going on and there's nothing they can do about it. So that's important too. All right, let's hit our last point.
Our last point is, here we go. Don't stay in the moment. So you mentioned moments, and I would have thought that we would have ended with something like stay in the moment or be in the moment or appreciate the moment or something, but we're saying don't stay in the moment. So why don't stay in the moment? P.S. These 5 points will be available starting tomorrow morning on my website, which is drchristhurber.com. And that way, if you are watching a recording of this, or you would just like a quick review after having participated live, right on the homepage, drchristhurber.com, Sarah and I will make sure there's a nice PDF to download. Don't go there right now because it's not there, but it will be tomorrow morning.
Part. Yeah.
So don't stay in the moment.
Well, and you have to be in the moment, and as a leader, you have to be looking down the road. So someone told me when I was starting out in my leadership role that as you get higher up in the organization, the further in time you're looking down the road. So a on the ground staff member might be looking an hour down the road, and then a floor manager type person might be looking 3 hours or a week down the road, and then someone running a branch might be looking a year down the road, but an executive director, CEO, et cetera, is looking 5, 10, 50 years down the road at all times. And right now, because we've been in crisis mode, we've been looking an hour down the road or a day down the road or a year down the road at all times. And that's necessary. But typically crises happen, and then maybe there's an endpoint to the crisis. The tornado is over, or,
Right
the
now it's time to clean up,
tragedy
but
happened. And there's no endpoint exactly to what's happening right now, which is forcing us to stay in the moment, which is incredibly taxing on us as leaders. And so to be able to really actually even carve out some time on your calendar and to orient all the big decisions you're making around what is the impact 5 years from now and 10 years from now on these decisions is really important criteria. A lot of folks in the summer youth program space, for instance, are thinking, how do I save this summer? How do I pivot to virtual camp? How do I talked to a camp director the other day. His board wants him to keep all payments that have already been made to the camp. In the short term, maybe that will help, but you have to look at the customer lifetime value of all of these folks and the goodwill that would be lost if you kept all of their money, right? Maybe you save $500 for this year, but over the course of 10 years, that person would contribute $5,000, right? So maybe a simple example, I don't think most people are doing that. But when we're making decisions and when we're steering our organizations, we have to carve out space for thinking long-term as well, which is really hard because there's so many short-term questions.
yeah.
And you can't count on any of your contingencies because things are changing so quickly. But how do you make the decision that gives you the best chance of a good future, not just next year, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
So we're not saying, yes, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
We're not saying don't be in the moment ever. What we're saying is don't get stuck in the moment.
right.
It is easy when there is a crisis to be in sort of triage mode. We've got to see what is the most urgent thing right now. And as you said, necessarily our kind of perspective is foreshortened. So we're thinking about an hour or a day ahead. And then as things begin to settle a bit, we can think about what about the end of the week or next week, a month down the road, 6 months down the road. But what we're wanting all leaders to do right now is spend some time thinking about next year, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, because the decisions you're making now do have consequences for the future. And it's important that you as a leader are spending some time really focused on your team's needs right now and on the health of your organization in a year, in a couple of years. And you'll be happy that you did that. But it's easy to get stuck right now in, because we've been doing it for a bunch of weeks, a kind of myopic, but adaptive for a little while, crisis management mode. Let us quickly review the 5 points that Sarah and I have made before we take a question or two from the group. The first was communicate less. And Sarah, can you summarize that in a sentence?
Yeah, and maybe the better phrase to think about it is communicate selectively. So we're figuring out which information is important, which meetings are important, and we're focusing on those so we don't add to the noise. So when we have something to say, every word counts and people listen.
Okay, outstanding. The next was give more challenges, by which we meant move on from the acute sort of crisis management mode to now ensuring that each member of your team has an important job to do. You've decided what those most important goals are for your organization, and you're confident that people have established a routine that allows them to really dig in. The next was return to your roots before you branch out. What's
Yeah.
the summary there?
So here we talked about character strengths and thinking about why were you hired for this job you have now? Why were you passionate about it? And answering the same question for our team members. And so identifying that people thrive when they're able to employ their character strengths, and figuring out how do we infuse more of that into their day-to-day activities, because people are getting pretty bogged down. But if they are able to leverage their character strengths, it'll have benefits for them and for the organization.
Well summarized. Show your weaknesses was about being honest with what the state of affairs is, not only humanizing your experience of the pandemic and the changes it has, or the havoc and changes it has, wreaked on your organization, but being candid with your team about some of the really difficult states of affairs, as well as some of the benefits to the organization, but not BSing at this point simply as a way to prevent people from feeling badly. And finally, don't stay in the moment, which we also wanted to, this may also have a good rephrase. Don't only stay in the moment. What did we mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, we want people to play the long game and the short game. So this is crisis management like we've never seen before, because the crisis just keeps on going and keeps on changing. There's no exact endpoint in sight. So if you stay in the moment all the time, it's a recipe for burnout, and you can get roadblocked from thinking ahead of how your decisions are going to impact the long-term health of your organization. So if you have decision-making criteria, which I highly recommend that you create, you need to have some sections there about how it will impact your organization in a year, in 10 years, in 50 years, or what options it gives you at those points in time, so you don't make a decision that helps out your organization now, but really, creates another crisis or another emergency for your organization in the future. So,
Again, well summarized. So we're almost at time, and Sarah, I got to hand it to us that we started on Facebook. When that blew up, we moved over to Zoom. Everybody moved over with us, which was awesome. And we've been able to answer people's questions along the way, and also get wonderful contributions from people in the chat, which is an unexpected bonus. Thank you for everyone contributing to resources that we can share. I've got a slide up of your logo. I've said enough about my things. Could you share with people who are listening live or to the recording a bit about what Summer Camp Society is doing? Because I think it is especially germane to what you and I have talked about today.
Yeah, so Jack Schott and I founded the Summer Camp Society 4 years ago to create a community environment for camp directors specifically, because even though camp directors build community and have lots of time with others, it can also be a very isolating job because it's a weird one. And we wanted camp directors to learn and have the camp feelings that our campers have, where they're learning in a hands-on way with others. So within the coronavirus crisis, we decided that people need a weekly forum where they can connect with other people who are kind of in the same boat. So we're starting a Kindred group program next Monday. Registrations are due tomorrow. It's a sliding scale to join. You can pay $0 or you can pay up to $25, a portion of which goes to the YMCA of Greater Flint Feeding Communities program. But we're basically coordinating spaces where folks can get together to either talk about being fired or furloughed or laid off, where people can talk about having to cancel their summer youth program, where people can talk about creating community through virtual programs, where people can talk about moving forward but looking different, so making changes and adaptations, and where people can talk about helping out their community. So looks like Darby just put the form to sign up in the chat. So we'd love to
Ah,
see
fantastic.
lots of folks there. Nobody else gets it if you're a camp director during this time except other camp directors. But we're doing our best to sort people into kindred groups of other folks who can have some meaningful conversations together. So,
And for those of you who are school leaders, who are heads of school, who are deans, head of boarding, deputy heads in different countries, you should check out the resources on the National Association of Independent Schools website, so NAIS, as well as the Association of Boarding Schools, TABS. Both NAIS and TABS have microsites on their websites that are easy to find and have organized resources, as Sarah is describing, based on what your needs are. So rewinding to the very first point we made about communicate less, we think that more specialized and curated bundles of information are what people want right now. And depending on your profession, may not be camp or school, it may be something else. I think that you'll be able to find in those professional organizations affiliated with your, particular job, some curated, bundled groups of resources and people who are going through something similar. This is certainly a time when we can all use the kind of social support that can only come from a peer who gets what it is that is challenging to you professionally. I want to just say one other thing, which is Sarah and I, as professional educators, enjoy and are honored by the opportunity to share some of our thoughts and some of what we know. We also feel, both of us, it's very important that everyone has a confidant who is a peer outside of your organization, somebody who is going to be honest with you, not mince words, not pull punches, be candid, and give you feedback that you can trust. You can confide in them, but they're not looking at the world through the same organizational lenses as you are. There's a great value to that freshness. So if you want to learn more about the work that Sarah does, you can visit her website, which is kurtzmckinnoncreative.com. If you want to learn more about the work that I do, christhurber.com. You're going to see the links up there in the chat. And we will post a one-page handout, which is a brief summary of some of the points that we've made in this webinar. It'll also be an edited recording without all of the craziness in the first 10 minutes. Will be available on my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Chris Thurber. And you probably will also be able to find links to that from Facebook or from Sarah's website, again, which is kurtzmckinnoncreative.com. Any closing thoughts, Sarah?
Chris, thank you for having me. This is good stuff to talk about. And this is one of these like shared generational experiences. So as disappointing as it is to think about everything that we've lost or that's being canceled or the lives that are being lost during this time, the kids and staff that we work with and serve will, move forward from this. And I think be a stronger generation because of it. So I think that ultimately is the purpose of many of our youth programs. So if we think about returning to our roots, that's what I would keep in mind. How do we be shepherds and guides for these people that count on us in a bad situation, and recognize that on the other side of it, there'll be some really positive outcomes for them too, even though we wouldn't wish this upon, any generations in the future. So, so that's what I'd like to say. I think we still do important work, even if we can't do it in the normal way that we've unfortunately been planning for the last, several months. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to our friends, Stephen Bernstein and Darby Dame, who behind the scenes help things run so smoothly. Grateful that all of you were able to join us, and stay tuned to our various outlets and websites for announcements about more great educational resources. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everybody.